How you doing?
Great, Randy. Awesome to see you again. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, it's great to see you. We're certainly in that time of year where a lot of groups are getting the opportunity to go inside and perform in an indoor football stadium. And there may be some directors out there that I know there was a big super regional here in Indianapolis this past weekend. There was one in St. Louis.
Mhm.
I'm sure that maybe there's a little bit of shock. Maybe a group has been doing pretty well outside, and then they come inside and their score either comes down or they're not. There's some things that aren't readable that were readable, outside. So we had that session with Tony Lyman about a week ago, talking about doing that transition indoors. And I know you were in St. Louis this past weekend. What are some things that judges were talking about with regards to the indoor arena and just how that's so much different?
Well, I'll just talk about one of them and then I'll let you take it from there. One of the things that we talked about was the whole timing aspect and the fact that bands were struggling to stay together. And I'm guessing that a lot of those bands that were struggling with timing probably were fine outdoors, but when they came in, their kids weren't ready for that echo. They also weren't ready for that feeling, as you know, Randy, when kids get out there, even if they may be just two steps apart from other players, they still feel like they're by themselves and they're playing by themselves. So I think it's really important for those of you that are getting ready to go indoors to practice that indoors. And you're like, well, how do we do that? And most of you know already, find the biggest room you can find. And if you can't use anything but a hallway, you know, do that. But if you can get into a big gym, beg your athletic director to open up a gym for an hour for you and get your kids in there and spread them all over the place. And I'm very serious about that. If you have a gym that's just normal size, but you have a couple levels to it, move some of your kids up to an upper level. First of all, they'll love it. They'll have a blast doing it. But it's going to freak them out a little bit when you say, okay, now we're spread all over Kingdom Come, play right in time. And then you start talking about you're going to hear an echo up there. You got to ignore it. You got to stay right on the hands. And that's how I'll conclude. Then I'll turn it over to you, Randy. Whatever you're doing normally, you got to do in the dome. If you are on the hands outside, you got to be on the hands in the dome. And some people will say, well, actually, Richard, you got to be a little ahead. And I get that. We just don't want to freak kids out and change what they're thinking. But I found that in most cases, if they'll just do what they normally do, except for the listening part, because they're going to hear the echo, and they still want to do their listening part, especially if they're close to the drum line, whatever, or if they're listening back for an ensemble. But they just have to understand to deal with the echo and ignore it. So it's tough, but practice it indoors because I think that'll, in a room where it rings and echoes, that'll help your kids so much.
Yeah. And, if you take the feedback from the judges, if you've been indoors and you've gotten, different feedback than what you were receiving outside, look at the reasons why. Was it the battery tuning, the membrane instruments? Was it, we all know that most arenas capture low frequency sounds, particularly electronics. They stay very static and they hang around in the stadium for a long period of time. There really is physics involved in that, and just trying to discover ways to create clarity. If they're complaining about clarity, it could be the length of an articulation, space between notes. You may have to exaggerate depending on what the judges are giving you in terms of feedback. So kind of qualify those things and then make the appropriate adjustments and actually rehearse those outside and be willing to understand that as you rehearse them outside, assuming that you're going in for the rest of your season, that you allow certain things to sound a certain way outside, knowing that they're going to trust that they're going to sound
Yep.
the way they're supposed to outside. And a lot of that has to do with battery tuning and volume and electronic volume, things like that. Just don't be afraid if the show feels a little more stark outside because you're trying to play to the indoor arena, or a little drier. Maybe that's a better sense of what I'm trying to say is
Mhm.
uh, that drier approach that's going to come about outside as opposed to when you go inside and it's going to liven up. So just use your ears and talk to others who have been in the arena that you're going to and ask them about drum tuning, particularly if you have a young percussion instructor that doesn't understand you can't,
Yeah.
do some of the things that you do outside with battery tuning. um, the electronic piece, talk to people. There's people willing to share information. Don't go in without having some conversations there in regards to some of that information.
Absolutely. I think that'll help a ton. Just talk with some people who have the experience. Okay, it'll make all the difference.
Yep. Well, we wish all of you great success as you go to the indoor venues over the next couple of weeks. And we've been really impressed with what we've seen this fall. I know we've said that every weekend, but we really have. It's been great. Band directors, you're overcoming a lot of adversity, just as we knew you would.
Mm-hmm.
And keep up the great work. And we'll see you next week on Coffee Talk.
Yeah. Congratulations, everyone. Have a great week.